waiting for us. We quickly turned around. Another bunch appeared behind us. We were surrounded. Barry Dunn stepped out of the crowd, tapping the head of a baseball bat in his hand. It's time for our rematch, he said with a confident sneer. Now we'll see how tough you really are. The gang of dirtbags moved closer until they formed a circle around Josh, Andy, and me. There was no way to escape. They had baseball bats and axe handles. We had our bare hands. Any last words? Dunn asked. Let my friends go, I said. They have nothing to do with this. Dunn squinted suspiciously. Is this another one of your tricks? I shook my head. It's no trick. I just don't want them to get hurt. Ah, isn't that sweet? Dunn leered. Jake's worried about his friends. I actually think it's really considerate of him, Josh said. And he happens to be right, added Andy. We really don't have anything to do with this. You'd really desert your friend in his hour of need? Dunn asked them. Andy swallowed and looked around at the dirtbags. Basically, yes. Okay, you two can go, Dunn said. Josh and Andy turned to me with apologetic expressions on their faces. Hope you don't mind, Jake, Josh said. It's just that baseball bats can hurt. But we'll still be your friends, said Andy. You lived through this, added Josh. I just nodded. Can't say I blamed them for not wanting to stick around. So, we'll call you in the morning, okay? Andy started to back away. If you're not home, we'll try the hospital, added Josh. The ring of dirtbags parted to let them through. Then it closed again. Dunn was still tapping the head of the bat against his palm. And you thought all you needed was big muscles, he sneered. A few friends who weren't chicken would help, I thought. So, Dunn said. So, what? I asked. I'm waiting for you to try some kind of trick. Dunn said. That's what you always did in the past. I shook my head. Can't think of one this time. Dunn studied me skeptically for a moment, but I guess he believed me. See, it takes more than big muscles, he said. You were probably better off with a brain. I'll try to remember that, I said. Actually, you ain't gonna remember anything, Barry growled. He raised his bat as if he was getting ready to hit a baseball. The other dirtbags raised their bats and axe handles. I braced myself. This wasn't going to be pretty. Hold it, Dunn, a voice said. Everyone turned. Mr. Braun, with my body, was strolling down the street toward us. His hands were in the pockets of his coat and he didn't seem to be in any particular hurry. Get lost, Dunn warned him. This has nothing to do with you. I know that, Mr. Braun said. I was on my way to meet my girlfriend. I just stopped to show you something. Barry frowned. Like what? Mr. Braun walked through the crowd of dirtbags and stopped in front of Dunn. On the other side of the street, Josh and Andy paused on the sidewalk and watched. I just noticed the way you were holding the bat, Mr. Braun said. What about it? Dunn asked. It's not the correct stance. Correct stance. Dunn scowled. What are you talking about? This ain't baseball, it's a fight. Doesn't matter, Mr. Braun said. If you're going to hit a baseball, a softball, or Sherman's head, there's only one way to hold the bat. Look. Pretending he was holding a bat in his hand, Mr. Braun got into a stance. See this. Hands together, elbows out, the bat back, weight on the back foot. Dunn tried to mimic the position. No, Mr. Braun shook his head. You have to hold the bat farther back. Otherwise, you wind up swinging backward before you swing forward. Here, look, Mr. Braun reached for Barry's bat. It's like this. You hold the bat way back here. Get it? Dunn nodded. Good, Mr. Braun said, handing the bat to me and turning to the rest of gang. Now all of you, get into the proper stance. The others tried to follow Mr. Braun's instructions. No, Mr. Braun went around shaking his head and correcting them. Then he turned to Andy and Josh. Kent, Hopka, you guys know how to hold a bat. Come over here and show them. The next thing I knew, Mr. Braun, Josh, and Andy were holding baseball bats and showing the dirtbags the correct stance. I still had Dunn's bat. There, do you all get it? Mr. Braun asked. The dirtbags nodded. Good. Mr. Braun raised his bat and motioned for Josh, Andy, and me to do the same. Now I'll give you to the count of 3 to get out of here before me and Hopka and Kent and Sherman beat you into greasy grimy gopher guts. A stunned silence descended over the gang of dirtbags. Some of them still had bats and axe handles, but now, instead of facing one unarmed person, they were facing 4 of us with bats. Barry Dunn's jaw dropped. Why, you, Mr. Braun turned to him. I've had it with you, Dunn. The next time you so much as touch a kid, on or off school grounds. The next time I even hear that you've bothered someone, I'm going to come after you, understand? Dunn nodded slowly. Mr. Braun turned to the rest of the dirtbags. That goes for all of you, too. Now, get lost. Muttering angrily, Barry and his friends trudged away down the street. Mr. Braun turned to Josh, Andy, and me and smiled. Funny what can happen when you use your brain, huh? The day after vacation, I got to Mr. Dirkson's room half an hour before the first bell. Mr. Dirkson and Mr. Braun were already there. Mr. Dirkson was bent over the experiment, fiddling with some wires. Mr. Braun was sitting on a school desk. His shoulders were slumped and the corners of his mouth hung down. Hey, Mr. Braun, what's up? I asked. He didn't answer. He just sat there looking glum. Something wrong? I asked. Bertha broke up with me last night, he said. She said she needed someone with bigger muscles. I tried to explain that I'd be getting mine back, but she didn't believe me. Bummer, Mr. Braun, I said. Sorry about that. The gym teacher nodded. It's probably for the best. Even when I get my old body back, I don't think I'll be the same person. Me, neither, I said. Mr. Braun brightened. You think you and your friends will take better care of your bodies from now on? No, but we'll probably try badminton. Mr. Braun grinned. I grinned too. Okay, gentlemen, Mr. Dirkson said. We're ready. I stepped over to my spot and Mr. Braun went to his. I knew I was going to miss having his body, but I was looking forward to having brains again. I glanced over at Mr. Braun and caught his eye. Being really smart was kind of fun, he said. It's not an all or none proposition, I said. You can work on your brains. And you can work on your body, he said. You don't have to be a muscle man, but you should cut down on the junk food and get in shape. Here goes. Mr. Dirkson said. Whoomp. That afternoon, Amber and I walked down the hall toward the gym. So how do you stop a 2,000-pound elephant from charging? I asked. I don't know, how? Amber said. Take away its credit cards. Amber smiled and gazed affectionately at me. I still can't believe the change in you, Jake. Just a week ago, you were a muscle-headed dimwit. They weren't really muscles, I explained. I was just all swollen up. It was an allergic reaction to something I'd eaten. And the reason I seemed so dim was because of the medication they had me on. It was a totally feeble explanation, but people seemed to buy it just the same. How else could they explain what had happened to me? Well, I'm glad you're the old Jake again, Amber said. Hey, you guys, wait up. Someone yelled. We turned and saw Josh and Andy jogging up the hall toward us. So, I see the swelling went down, Andy said. How about the swelled head? Josh asked. Very funny, I grumbled. Hey, just kidding. Josh held out a small bag of chips. Want some? I hesitated. After all, I'd promised Mr. Braun FD cut down on the junk food. Then again, it was just a couple of chips. I reached in and got a handful of chiplets. Hey, just one. Josh cried. Nah, it's okay. Andy slapped me on the back. It's good to know that some things never change. About the